What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. We got another jam-packed episode for you guys today. We're going to be explaining what Jim Irsay meant by his recent comments about Anthony Richardson. Can the LA Rams overachieve this year? Not too many people are expecting many big things out of the Rams this year. They had a really underwhelming 2022 season. And going into this year, it looks like they're entering a slight rebuild. But there may be the opportunity for the Rams to end up over-exceeding expectations this year. You remember what the New York Giants did last season, along with the Seattle Seahawks. Those were two franchises going into 2022 that not too many people expected much from them, and then they ended up surprising. And there always are one or two teams who end up over-exceeding expectations. Nobody expects them to end up being a playoff team, and they sneak into the postseason. Maybe that could be the LA Rams' fate this year. Cincinnati Bengals keys to the season. What do the Bengals need to do? Who do they need to step up in order to have a successful season? What are my expectations for the Jacksonville Jaguars offense this year? And lastly, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on how good I feel Louisville Football is going to be year one under new head coach Jeff Brohm. Before we get into it, if you haven't already, make sure that you go ahead, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We go live every day at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. Remember that you can listen to the audio version of the JT Sports Podcast on all podcasting platforms. We're not just available on YouTube. You can find us on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoy this episode of the pod, make sure that you go ahead and rate us 5 stars. We're really close to getting 100 5-star reviews on Apple. We currently are at 69, so go ahead, get us to 70 by giving us a 5-star review. All you got to do is go to the JT Sports Podcast, which you can type into any podcasting platform that you use, and it will pop up. Or you can go down to the description down below, scroll down a little bit, and there will be the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the podcast. And last thing, make sure that you guys are following me on all of my social media pages, man. The social media pages have been going up over the last couple of days. You can find us on Twitter at JTSports__ and on Twitter at JTSports_. And we are on the new social media platform called Threads. Make sure to follow us there at JTSports_. So the Twitter and Threads is at JTSports_, and you can follow us on Twitter at JTSports__. If you want to submit a question to potentially be featured on a future episode of the pod, you can send them via the DMs on Instagram and Twitter. Let's get into it, man. Colts owner Jim Irsay recently on the episode of the Pat McAfee show had some comments around Anthony Richardson, his future, and his development. And on the Pat McAfee show, he said, and I quote, "For Anthony Richardson, it's going to be tough. We know that. But he has to play to get better. I mean, there's no question. Gardner Minshew could come out and obviously play better early on, just being a veteran, but we have to get Anthony on the field. That's Shane Steichen's call when he decides to do it." Now, let's contextualize these comments by Jim Irsay, right? Basically, what he said about Anthony Richardson is that, hey, if you're a Colts fan, don't come into this season expecting Anthony Richardson to light the world on fire. And we know with Anthony Richardson, if you expect him to succeed this year, you know that there's going to be a lot of growing pains along this road. You're going to have some good performances where you see Anthony Richardson play fantastic and you say, okay, I see why the Indianapolis Colts drafted him 4th overall. And then you're going to see some games out of Anthony Richardson in 2023 that are going to make you say, okay, I get what everybody was saying about him being a project player. There's going to be a lot of ups and a lot of downs that comes with the Anthony Richardson experience in his first season if he does end up being named the week 1 starter. But what Jim Irsay has said isn't what most of us haven't said all off season. Most of us have pretty much have said that if Anthony Richardson is going to get better, he's only going to do that on the field, getting actual reps. There's only so much that you can learn sitting behind Gardner Minshew holding the clipboard. Anthony Richardson doesn't have a lot of experience being a quarterback. Not just a starting quarterback in the NFL, but just playing the quarterback position in general. He didn't start all but one season fully for the Florida Gators last season. So this is somebody that has all the tools and all the potential to be the most talented quarterback in the NFL, but you have to get him up to stuff when it comes to what it takes to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. For Anthony Richardson, it's going to take him a while to get to where he needs to be from a mental aspect, being able to process defenses, being able to understand how defenses are trying to disguise their coverages and trying to bait him into mistakes. Those are things that you can learn on the bench, but you're going to have a better time understanding those things faster by seeing it in-game, getting more in-game experience and repetition. And for the Indianapolis Colts, I don't think throwing Anthony Richardson out there to the Wolves week 1 puts you at a disadvantage in terms of you being able to win games. We've seen examples from Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Justin Fields, teams being able to win with a quarterback who may not be polished as a passer, but is a fantastic athlete with his legs. Justin Fields, and the games that he played last year for the Chicago Bears, a good handful of those games came down to one possession scores due to how well he played. And especially when you look at what Lamar Jackson did his rookie season with the Baltimore Ravens. He pretty much turned their season around, saved John Harbaugh's job, and got the Ravens into the wild card round, not just because what he did throwing the football, which he wasn't great at his rookie season, but how unstoppable he was when he decided to run with the football. And when you look at Anthony Richardson, the guy has incredible size, great athleticism. I mean, this dude is the second coming of Cam Newton, just with some slight upgrades. So there's not too many people that are going to want to tackle a 6'4", 6'5" quarterback that's 240 something pounds that runs 4.4 in the open field. There's not too many teams who are going to be able to slow down this rushing attack with AR and Jonathan Taylor. So there is a formula to the Indianapolis Colts being able to be a competitive football team this year, despite the fact that we know that Anthony Richardson is going to be less to be desired as a passer. And you got to have a lot of confidence in Shane Steichen, and that's why Jim Irsay left that comment, or the last portion of it, saying that it's basically in Shane Steichen's court when he feels Anthony Richardson is ready to be thrown out there. And if Anthony Richardson is thrown out there early, I'm pretty confident that Shane Steichen is going to put Anthony Richardson in the offense that's going to minimize his weaknesses and maximize his strength. Shane Steichen is a really successful offensive coordinator, or he was a really successful offensive coordinator prior to getting the head coaching job in Indianapolis. We know what he did the last couple of seasons with Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, but a lot of people tend to forget that he was also Justin Herbert's offensive coordinator his rookie season when he was going off for the LA Chargers. And the same thing that people were saying about Anthony Richardson, most people were echoing those similar sentiments with Justin Herbert going into his rookie season. And we saw how Justin Herbert completely shocked everybody with how well he played during his rookie campaign. So with Anthony Richardson, he is in great hands with Shane Steichen being his head coach. Shane Steichen has worked with quarterbacks that have a similar skill set to Anthony Richardson. Jalen Hurts wasn't the most polished passer coming out of Oklahoma, and Shane Steichen was able to put him in the system that was able to get Jalen Hurts to play at a good enough level that got the Philadelphia Eagles to the playoffs during Jalen Hurts' second year. And then last season, we saw Jalen Hurts take a tremendous leap under Shane Steichen in his second season, having him as his offensive coordinator. So if you look at the job that Shane Steichen has previously done with Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts, you have to feel pretty confident if you're an Indianapolis Colts fan about how Anthony Richardson is going to perform this year. Now, if you're expecting Anthony Richardson to come into his first season and just absolutely dominate from week 1 to week 17, like, your expectations are way too high. There's going to be some great performances and some performances that make you shake your head. That's just what's going to come with the Anthony Richardson experience. You got a very young quarterback who's a very raw passer, and a lot of the things that he has to clean up can be fixed over time with repetition and great coaching. But Anthony Richardson is only going to get better with in-game experience. And if you're the Indianapolis Colts and you're inside of the organization, you already know that if you start Anthony Richardson, you're probably not going to be good during his first season, but you're okay with that because this season is dedicated towards making Anthony Richardson gaining more experience and making sure that he's able to get thrown into the water really early. So come next season, you won't have as many growing pains. So this is basically what I have concluded and gathered from Jim Irsay's recent comments on Monday when he did his guest appearance on the Pat McAfee show. And we already know that if you do start Gardner Minshew week 1, he gives you the best chance to win. But it seems like if they go with Anthony Richardson week 1, it seems like the long-term goal of this season is going to be trying to be as competitive as possible with Anthony Richardson at the helm as the starting quarterback. But I like the fact that Jim Irsay's comments pretty much say that the Colts are going all in on Anthony Richardson this year. So if Anthony Richardson gets thrown into the fire and he struggles early, it doesn't sound like they plan on taking him out. It sounds like regardless how bad he plays, they're going to continue to let him push through it because that's the only way young quarterbacks can get better, especially in the face of adversity. So let me know what you guys think about Jim Irsay's comments about Anthony Richardson, his status as the starter going into this year, and his development. The Los Angeles Rams have a over-under win total going into this year of 6.5. Now it's funny because a year ago around this time, we were discussing if the LA Rams were going to be able to repeat as Super Bowl champions. And not too long after, they end up being the biggest disappointment throughout the 2022 NFL season. I don't think anybody expected the Rams to not just miss the playoffs, but to have one of the worst records in the NFL. Now, going into 2023, most people expect the Rams to be one of the worst teams in the NFL, but is there a possibility that this team could overachieve this year? You got to remember, last year, nobody expected too much out of the Seattle Seahawks and the New York Giants. Both of those two teams were expected to have top 3, top 5 picks in this past year's NFL draft. And what did they do? They end up exceeding expectations and making it into the playoffs. Could the Rams follow a similar path? Now, it's going to be really tough for them to overachieve this year. You have a really tough schedule where you could potentially end up playing 9 teams that could be in the playoffs this season. And then you're in the same division where you have to play the Seattle Seahawks and the 49ers twice this year. Both of those two teams have some of the best rosters in the NFL. And for the LA Rams, you're going to be starting a lot of rookies potentially. I mean, they drafted 14 rookies during the draft, and they also signed a good amount of rookies via undrafted rookie free agency. Now, you do bring back Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald. Those are your main core guys, but you don't know if Matthew Stafford is going to be able to hold up for the whole entire season. And there's some rumors going around that the Rams tried to shop Matthew Stafford. So we don't know how Sean McVay feels about Matthew Stafford. And if the season ends up going to the extent where the Rams aren't good during, week 10, week 11, and the season is already over, we could see him bench Matthew Stafford and throw in Stetson Bennett to see what he has. And if Stetson Bennett gets the opportunity, I think that Stetson Bennett is going to thrive in Sean McVay's system. I believe a large reason why the Rams decided to draft Stetson Bennett was due to the success that Brock Purdy had in Kyle Shanahan's system. So you look at a Stetson Bennett, somebody who has a lot of experience, has a little bit more talent than what some people give him credit for. He could end up being the long-term answer at quarterback for the Rams, and maybe we get to see him sometime this season. Now, for the Rams to be able to overachieve this year, you're going to need Matthew Stafford to stay healthy. And then you're going to need this offensive line to play at a really high level because you have a really tough schedule. You're going up against some of the best defensive lines in the NFL. You already know how good the 49ers defensive line is, but you also have to face off against teams like the Washington Commanders, who also have really good interior defensive line play. So you're going to need your offensive line to be able to hold up this year. Now, when you look at their offensive tackle situation, I don't think they're in too bad of a spot there. I think their biggest concerns comes on the interior of their offensive line. You don't really know how great your center play is going to be, and you don't know what you're going to be getting out of your interior offensive lineman at offensive guard. Now, Steve Avila was drafted pretty high by the Rams from this past year's draft class, and I had a pretty high grade on him. So I think he's going to be able to step in at one of those guard spots and have a huge impact right away. I expect him to be a week 1 starter, but they also have a rookie running back that I liked a lot coming out of Ole Miss, and Zach Evans. Now, Zach Evans, he gives me Alvin Kamara vibes, and we didn't really get to see the full capability of Zach Evans during his time in college because there was never really a head coach who was able to tap in to all of Zach Evans' potential. And when you look at the struggles that the Rams had in the run game last year, Zach Evans could be a guy who could end up stepping up and taking over that RB1 mantle from Cam Akers and whoever else they have behind him in that department. He may be the most talented running back that they have currently on the roster. He can do everything. He's a really good running back, has really good explosiveness and acceleration, but he also probably is the best pass catcher that they have at the running back position currently on their roster. Now, defensively, they have a lot of holes. I mean, you're wondering who's going to be that second pass rusher alongside Aaron Donald. How good is your secondary going to be? Like, your cornerback position just has a huge question mark on it, a huge Riddler question mark on it. We don't know how that secondary is going to play this year. So for the Rams, for them to overachieve this year, you're basically telling me that Sean McVay is going to have one of the best head coaching jobs that we've seen in a very long time. I mean, he has to coach up a team that's going to be starting multiple rookies at several key positions, and you're going to have one of the most difficult schedules in the NFL. Plus, you're playing in one of the most toughest divisions in the NFL this season, and that's even not including Arizona, because Arizona probably won't be good this year. But the Seattle Seahawks and the 49ers probably should be two of the top teams in the NFC this year. So you're going to have to win 4 tough games inside your division alone, and then you got to try to beat 9 other potential playoff caliber football teams. Like, even if Sean McVay coaches his tail off this year, the Rams at best probably only win 9 games this year. The NFC may not be a top heavy, may not be a heavy conference when it comes to quarterback play like the AFC is, but there are some quality teams in the NFC. But I'm not going to count out the LA Rams. You do have Sean McVay, who is one of the best offensive-minded coaches in the game. And if Matthew Stafford can stay healthy, and Cooper Kupp and Aaron Donald can as well, I think we could see the Rams, best case scenario, competing for the 7th seed in the NFC playoffs. And that may sound a little bit crazy, but remember, nobody expected Seattle and the New York Giants to do what they did last season. The LA Rams could very much do something similar, even though their schedule is way more difficult than what those two team schedules were last season. They're going to need some rookies to step up. Not even some rookies. They're going to need a lot of rookies to step up. But something that should give them a lot of confidence in that being able to happen is the fact that you have a lot of rookies. So, I mean, at least 5 or 6 of these guys should be serviceable starters for you, and at least maybe 3 or 2 of them could end up being elite players for you. I mean, you got so many rookies that you got from your undrafted free agency haul and via the draft that somebody got to end up being good, right?
Come on now, dog. Come on, man.
Somebody got to be good. Somebody got to end up stepping up and making some plays. But for the Rams to overachieve and for them to win more than 6 games, that's going to be really difficult for them. You're going to have to split both games between the Seahawks and the 49ers, and you're going to have to beat some really talented football teams this year with the schedule that they have. So I don't know if the Rams are going to pull off a New York Giants or Seattle Seahawks kind of season, but I don't know if I can see them winning less than 6 games. As a matter of fact, my worst case scenario would be 5 wins. My best case is 9 wins. Now, if I had to give you an overall prediction for the Rams this year, I'd probably go with 7 wins. It's hard for me to see them having one of the worst records in the NFL, at least having one of the top 3 worst records in the league this year due to how good their coaching is. And the Rams are going to be able to pull off a couple of upsets. This isn't college football where the teams with the best rosters always win the majority of times. Like in the NFL, these games are mostly close. Even if you have one of the best teams in the NFL going against one of the least talented in the NFL, if you have good coaching, that's going to cause the games to be fairly close. So Sean McVay, this is probably going to be the toughest head coaching job that he's ever had during his career up to this point with the Los Angeles Rams. You're banking on a lot of rookies stepping up. You need Matthew Stafford to stay healthy. And you have a lot of concerns at a lot of different positions on both the offensive and defensive side of the football. So I don't know if I think that the Rams are going to be able to overachieve and get into the playoffs, but maybe they could end up winning one more game than what their over-under win total may suggest at 6.5. But give me your thoughts on the LA Rams going into this season, and if you think they're capable of being able to over-exceed expectations. If you haven't already, make sure that you go ahead, leave a like, and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, we go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're enjoying the episode of the podcast so far, make sure that you go ahead, leave us with a 5-star review. We're trying to get to 100 5-star reviews on Apple and Spotify before the college football and NFL seasons kick off. So make sure that you go ahead, give us a follow on Apple and Spotify, subscribe to the podcast there. All you got to do is type in the JT Sports Podcast and it will pop up. Or you can go down to the description down below, scroll down a little bit, and there will be the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the podcast. Got to get me a little sip of water real quick. All right, so the next thing we got to talk about is this. Cincinnati Bengals keys to the season. What do the Bengals need to do? Who do the Bengals need to step up in order to have a successful 2023 campaign? Now, the Cincinnati Bengals have made it to the AFC Championship for the last 2 seasons. They beat Kansas City, made it to the Super Bowl against the LA Rams, which they lost 2021, 2022, and last season they went back to the AFC Championship game but came up short against Kansas City. So in 2023, I'm pretty sure that most Bengals fans are thinking Super Bowl win. And if you don't come away with the Lombardi Trophy in your hands at the end of the season, then I'm pretty sure most Bengals fans would view this season as a disappointment. Now, for the Bengals to end up winning a Super Bowl this year and living up to those high expectations, they need this offensive line to finally give Joe Burrow some elite protection. Now, you thought the offensive line was going to be figured out last season if you were a Bengals fan, and you had good reason to think that. You spent a lot of money in free agency overhauling the offensive line, and most of your offensive line signings hit last season. The interior of your offensive line was pretty solid when everybody was healthy, but you didn't get good play from your 2 offensive tackles last year. La'el Collins wasn't good. He was a massive disappointment, and Jonah Williams wasn't good neither at left tackle. So how do you address that situation? Well, you pay top money to sign left tackle Orlando Brown, who played for the Kansas City Chiefs last year. Now, he's going to be replacing Jonah Williams at left tackle, and you really, really need him to play at a really elite level this year. If the Cincinnati Bengals are going to win the Super Bowl this year, you're going to need Orlando Brown to be one of the best offensive tackles in the league this year. You need him to be top 3 at that left tackle position because you're in a division that has a lot of good pass rushers and a lot of good defensive lines. You're going up against Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, some of the best pass rushers in this league reside in this division. So you need to be able to keep Joe Burrow protected up front. And that's going to largely hinge on the play and the production of Orlando Brown. Now, there's a lot of people who consider Orlando Brown to be the most overrated offensive tackle in the NFL. Now, he's a really great run blocker, but his pass protection is really inconsistent at times. But if the Bengals can get Orlando Brown playing at a really high level when it comes to run blocking and pass protection, this offensive line is going to be massively improved this year just based off his performance alone. Now, second up is they need to figure out who the hell is going to be playing right tackle for them and if they're going to be able to get good play out of that side of the offensive tackle position. Now, left tackle shouldn't be an issue, but right tackle, you're either going to be starting Jonah Williams, converted left tackle, or you're going to be starting La'el Collins. Now, La'el Collins wasn't great last year. Maybe it was due to the fact that he was still adjusting, trying to get acclimated to Cincinnati's system, but you paid him a good amount in free agency, and he didn't really deliver on his contract. Now, Jonah Williams, you tried to shop him around. I guess nobody was interested, so he's still on the roster, at least at the time this is being recorded. So it looks like there's going to be a position battle throughout training camp to determine who's going to be the second starting offensive tackle on this offensive line, lining up on the opposite side of Orlando Brown. Now, Jonah Williams gave up 7 sacks or more last season. I think it was either 7 or 8. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but you're going to need good offensive tackle play if you're Cincinnati and you're looking to make it deep into the postseason and you're trying to win a Super Bowl. If you're trying to win a Super Bowl, your offensive line can't be as bad as what it has been for Cincinnati the previous 2 years that you've been in the postseason. You need better play out of your offensive line. And for Cincinnati, you have your interior offensive line situation figured out. Like, nobody's worried about how good you're going to be at your center and your 2 offensive guard spots. It largely is with how you're going to get good play out of your offensive tackles, mainly your right tackles, because we don't know who's going to start, Collins or Williams. If I was a better man, I probably would put my money with La'el Collins. And that may sound a little bit crazy to say, but Jonah Williams, although he does have the capability of being able to play both left and right tackle, I don't really know if he's going to do a great job of being able to make the transition to right tackle. I really think that La'el Collins is more of a true right tackle, and I think that maybe last year he just was struggling to get a little bit adjusted to Cincinnati's offense. I do think that if he ends up winning the job this year, he will play much better. But they really need to get good play out of their right tackle position. I'm pretty confident that Orlando Brown is going to be really good for Cincinnati this year. If he struggles, that's going to be a really big problem that Cincinnati's going to have on their hands with his massive contract. And then right tackle, you need Jonah Williams or La'el to step up there. And then when we flip to the opposite side of the football, the defensive side, you have some huge concerns on your secondary. Now, you have talent there, but you have unproven talent there. It's going to be a difference going from Von Bell and Jesse Bates to having some new guys that not too many fans are familiar with in the back end of your secondary. Now, one of those guys is going to be second-year safety Dax Hill. Cincinnati needs him to have a breakout year. This was somebody who was a first-round pick in last year's draft by the Cincinnati Bengals coming out of Michigan. Dax Hill was one of the more freakish athletes coming out of last year's draft class. This dude has elite athleticism. He's like a pinball ball. You can line him up at safety and the slot at cornerback, and he can make a lot of plays for you due to how explosive he is when it comes to getting after the football, hauling down ball carriers. He also is pretty solid in coverage, so you can do a lot versatility-wise when it comes to how you use Dax Hill. Now, you also need some of your younger cornerbacks to step up, because Eli Apple is gone. He's a free agent, although Cincinnati could bring him back, but it looks like they're probably going to roll with Cam Taylor-Britt being their second cornerback on the opposite side of Chidobe Awuzie. Now, Cam Taylor-Britt, he had a pretty solid rookie season. I think that he played his best games of the year in the postseason. He had a really good game against the Buffalo Bills. He played very well against the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. So hopefully he can continue his performance throughout the postseason and carry that into the 2023 season. Now, if Cam Taylor-Britt doesn't work out, you got DJ Turner, who was a second-round pick from this past year's draft out of Michigan. And this dude was one of my favorite cornerbacks coming out. He's as good as an athlete as Cam Taylor-Britt and Dax Hill. Even though he plays cornerback, this dude has very good technique. He also has very great athleticism, and he's a physical, aggressive cornerback that can get in your face and really disrupt timing with these wide receivers when it comes to getting off the line. So if Cam Taylor-Britt ends up struggling and not working out, if you're Lou Anarumo, you can go ahead and throw DJ Turner into the mix there. So you're going to need big play out of whoever's going to be your second cornerback this year. We know what Chidobe Awuzie brings to the table when he's able to stay fully healthy. Now you're going to need your second cornerback spot to not be a concern, and you're going to need it to be a strength for this defense to be fully functional. So these are my Cincinnati Bengals keys to the season. What the Cincinnati Bengals need to do to have a successful season. Let me know what are some keys to the season that you guys have for the Bengals down in the comment section down below. I want to give my expectations for the Jacksonville Jaguars going into this season. Now, this offense was really good last year, even though they do need to have way less turnover issues this year than what they had last year, but that's to be expected when you have a young quarterback. Trevor Lawrence is going into year 3, and a lot of people are expecting Trevor Lawrence to win NFL MVP this year. He's been a very hot name when it comes to the MVP discussion, and outside of Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow, the quarterback who people think has the best chance of winning it in the AFC is T-Law. And for Trevor Lawrence, he right now is what I call ascension mode. And when your quarterback is in ascension mode, that means that all he does is keep getting better and better. And for Trevor Lawrence being in ascension mode and being mentioned in the MVP discussion, the Jacksonville Jaguars, let alone, should have a top 10 offense just based on how good Trevor Lawrence is expected to be this year. There's a good amount of people that I've talked to, Jacksonville Jaguar fans and non-Jags fans, who think that this is the year that Trevor Lawrence ends up becoming a top 3, top 5 quarterback in the game. And if he's going to end up doing that, it's going to be due, largely in due part, to the wide receivers that Jacksonville has on the roster. Now, we all know about what Christian Kirk did last season, his first year in Duval. He had over 1,000 yards signing and free agency. And then you trade at the trade deadline for Calvin Ridley, which I thought was a huge steal for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, a lot of people were a little bit confused when they made the trade for Calvin Ridley. They were like, bro, what are you doing drafting Calvin Ridley? This dude is not going to play this year. He's suspended for gambling. Well, the Jacksonville Jaguars were thinking ahead. You got to think big, people. You got to think long term. So you get Calvin Ridley. He gets reinstated. This dude is about to go off. Like, if you don't have Calvin Ridley, my bad, y'all. But if y'all don't have Calvin Ridley on your fantasy football squads, what are you doing, man? This dude is one of the best route runners in the game. Not just that, but when he's on the field, he's insanely productive. And I was listening to an episode of I Am Athlete a couple of weeks ago, and Brandon Marshall asked Devontae Adams to rank his top 5 wide receivers in the game. And he had Calvin Ridley inside his top 5. That really surprised me. So if Devontae Adams sees Calvin Ridley as a top 5 receiver, why aren't more people valuing what Calvin Ridley is going to bring to the Jags offense? You pretty much have 2 number 1 wide receivers on this offense. You got Christian Kirk And then you got Calvin Ridley. And then behind him, you're going to have Zay Jones as your wide receiver 3. This is going to be one of the best receiving duos in the NFL. And not too many people are talking about it. I think Christian Kirk is a little bit undervalued because he plays for Jacksonville. He may not be the most flashiest player, but every time I cut on a Jazz game last year, he was going off. And now you pair that up with Calvin Ridley. If Trevor Lawrence ends up winning MVP this year, it should not be a surprise when you look at the 2 receivers he's going to be throwing to, and Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. Now, you look at what they have at the running back position. You got Travis Etienne coming off a really great season, which kind of we can count as his rookie season because he didn't get to play under Urban Meyer. So last year was like his first year of really getting legitimate NFL action, and he didn't disappoint. He had 1,125 rushing yards, over 5 yards per carry, had 5 touchdowns. He also was a big threat in the passing game. Now, you drafted Tank Bigsby in the 3rd round out of Auburn. Now, a lot of Jaguar fans are really excited about what Tank Bigsby can bring to this offense. You're going to have somebody who is a little bit better running the football up the middle compared to Travis Etienne. He's not really a running back that's built for running the football a lot up the middle of the defense. But Tank Bigsby is a guy who is a really powerful and elusive runner. And a lot of people feel like Tank Bigsby never tapped into his full potential during his time at Auburn, during, the coaching turnover that they had, the fact that his offensive lines never were really all that good at run blocking. So going into this situation for Jacksonville, he has a clear-cut opportunity to run away with this backup running back job. And if he ends up being named RB2 going into week 1, we potentially could see him get a good amount of workload because the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm pretty sure they don't want to run Travis Etienne down into the drain. And plus, Travis Etienne also can line up in the slot. So you potentially could have Travis Etienne out wide along with Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley, and then have Tank Bigsby in the backfield. So Tank Bigsby, if he ends up panning out and living up to some of these big expectations that Jaguar fans are dreaming for him to have, he could bring a different dimension to this offense. You also have somebody who potentially could be better in red zone situations than what you were last year at the running back position. Now, Evan Ingram, he's having some contract talks with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We don't know if he's going to get a long-term extension or not, but he had the best season of his career undoubtedly last year, so I am expecting him to end up coming to agreement with a new contract for Jacksonville. But when he's on the field, that's just another weapon that Trevor Lawrence has at his disposal. And now you're going to have Evan Ingram, Calvin Ridley, and now Christian Kirk, along with Travis Etienne. Like, this is going to be a top 10 offense this year. Now, the biggest concern that most people have about the Jaguars going into this season is their offensive line. Now, your starting left tackle, Cam Robinson, is going to be serving a 4-game suspension, so you're not going to get him until week 5. So who's going to be replacing him? Well, that's going to be Walker Little, who already has played left tackle. He also can play right tackle, but he probably is going to be the dude who ends up substituting for Cam Robinson until he returns. And I think that you're fine at left tackle with Walker Little. Like, I don't think you're going to get elite left tackle play out of Walker Little, but you should get serviceable left tackle play. And then at your other offensive tackle position at right tackle, you got Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma, who was your first-round pick from this past year's draft. So I think at offensive tackle, you should be pretty solid. Now, Anton Harrison, he's a rookie. We don't really know what to expect from him because he hasn't played a single down of NFL football. But Jawan Taylor is coming off the best season of his career undoubtedly. And it's funny at the time that it came because last season was a make or break year for Jawan Taylor. He definitely cashed out in a major way and got paid. So Anton Harrison, hopefully you have somebody who can come in and be a productive right tackle for you instantly. But even if he struggles, hopefully he ends up at least being serviceable for you. Hopefully you don't end up having a drop-off in production from right tackle compared to the play that you got from that spot in Jawan Taylor last year, who's now with the Chiefs. Now, I'm more worried about the interior of Jacksonville's offensive line. All right, now I like Anton Harrison. I think he should be pretty solid. I think Walker Little will give them some security at left tackle until their starter comes back in Cam Robinson. Now, I don't know about Luke Fortner. Now, Jaguar fans that I've talked to said, he played pretty okay for a rookie, but he didn't necessarily blow me away. I guess for rookie standards, he was decent, but he could have been a little bit better. And the reason why I think that center is a big concern for Jacksonville and why they need Luke Fortner to have a really big year too is because when you look at the majority of teams that have elite offensive lines, it normally starts up front at center. Think about the Philadelphia Eagles. They got Jason Kelsey, one of the best centers to ever play this game. Like, the best offensive lines in the NFL, more times than not, have elite centers. And then when you look at the teams that go the furthest in the playoffs, it's the teams that normally have the best offensive line. So for Jacksonville, if they're trying to win a Super Bowl this year, you're going to need good play out of your offensive line. Now, this offensive line didn't play bad last year, but I do think that if this offensive line is trying to help this team win the Super Bowl, they need way more out of it. And it's going to start with Luke Fortner. So if there was a guy who needed to have a big season this year on this offensive line out of everybody, I think it has to start with Luke Fortner at that center position. Now, at your two offensive guard spots, you got Brandon Sheriff, who could start to be showing signs of regression. Last year was one of the worst seasons that he had in his whole entire career. And you got to remember that Brandon Sheriff has been one of the best offensive guards in the NFL for a very long time. So to see him kind of take a step back in 2022 is very alarming if you're a Jags fan. And then Ben Bartch, played 5 games last year. He got injured. In those 5 games, he looked better than what he did in his previous season. But I still think that he has a couple of ways to go. So when you look at your offensive line, you're going to be missing your starting left tackle for a couple of games. You're going to be starting a rookie out at right tackle. And then when you look at the interior of your offensive line, you're banking on guys like Luke Fortner and Ben Bartch being able to step up. And you could have a aging, regressing veteran and Brandon Sheriff. So I don't really know how I feel about Jacksonville's offensive line going into this season. I don't think their offensive line is bad, at least right now. But if I had to rank my confidence that I have in this offensive line from 1 to 10 going into this year, I probably would have it at 4. Okay, like I think that Brandon Sheriff could be on his way, to a huge decline. Father Time may end up catching up to him. Ben Bartch, we still need to see a little bit more out of him. Even though he did play better last season than the season prior, there's still more that we have to see from him. And then Luke Fortner, going into year 2, we need massive improvement when you look at that center position being probably the second most important position on that offensive line outside of left tackle. But overall, when you look at this offense in general, outside of the offensive line, this should be one of the best offenses in the NFL. And I expect the Jacksonville Jaguars to be a top 10 unit this year. You look at the talent that they have at receiver with just Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk alone. That's the top 10 wide receiver duo there. You got Evan Ingram, and you're going to have T-Law, who is expected to take a MVP kind of leap this year. This should be one of the best offenses in the NFL this year. Now, Louisville fans were really happy with the hiring of Jeff Brohm. So, Marcus Satterfield ends up going on to Cincinnati, and then they end up hiring Jeff Brohm. Now, Jeff Brohm was a huge hire for Louisville Football. This is somebody who was a star quarterback for them during his playing days for Louisville, led them to a good amount of success during his senior season. He also was somebody who played high school football around this area. So you have a hometown guy who knows this area, knows the expectations that comes with coaching at Louisville due to being a player there, and plus, Louisville already wanted Jeff Brohm to be their head coach back in 2018, but he turned them down when they were moving on from Bobby Petrino. So you bring in Jeff Brohm a few years later after he turned you down previously, and I think that the expectations for Louisville are pretty high considering the fact that this is Jeff Brohm entering year one. Now, why are Louisville fans so optimistic about their new first-year head coach? Well, JT, is because he's an alumni here. He's somebody that's well-respected amongst the fans. He's somebody that's going to be well-respected amongst the boosters, the alumni base, and that is true, but you also have somebody who understands the importance of beating Kentucky. And we already know, if you're a Louisville Cardinals fan, doesn't nothing make you even more mad than losing to Kentucky the way that you have the last couple of years? So you have a head coach that understands how to recruit this area, how to succeed at this program, but you also have a head coach that takes pride in beating Kentucky. You know, Marcus Satterfield, for the most part, he was on the hot seat for fairly most of the year until Louisville was able to turn it around late. So for Jeff Brohm, you're going to have somebody coming in here that's going to galvanize this fan base. And I think he's going to be able to galvanize this team right away, right out the gate. Now, they did lose a good amount of talent to the transfer portal, but they also bring in a good amount of talent via the transfer portal. They had the 14th ranked transfer portal class, according to 247 Sports. And there's going to be a lot of guys who they got in the transfer portal who they need to make big impacts this season, especially on offense, because you only return 4 starters on offense, 2 of those being on the offensive line. You also got a receiver and running back that returns from last season. And on defense, you got a good amount of starters who come back. You have pretty much all of your secondary that returns from last season. And when you look at some of the key transfers that Louisville brought in from the transfer portal on offense, obviously we got to talk about them bringing in Jack Plummer, who played for Cal last season. Prior to transferring to the University of California, he spent his first couple of years at Purdue under Jeff Brohm. So you already have a QB who knows the system. All he really needs to do is build some timing and chemistry with his new receivers. And he was somebody who had 21 touchdowns to only 9 interceptions playing for Cal last season. So imagine how good he can be with Jeff Brohm at a school that has a better supporting cast than what he had to throw to at Cal. And when you look at your wide receiver position, you return a starter from last year who was really productive, but you also got 2 really good receivers out of the portal. You got Keon Coleman, who comes from Jackson State. He played for Coach Prime last season. He had 33 catches for 510 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and Jamari Thrash. Now, Jamari Thrash is one of the best players that entered the transfer portal from a G5 school. He was the 13th ranked transfer portal wide receiver, and during his time at Georgia State last year, this dude was damn near the only thing that Georgia State had at offense at times. 61 catches for 1,122 receiving yards, 7 receptions that ended up resulting in touchdowns, and he was averaging 18.4 yards per catch. So Louisville, they got a pretty solid QB. Jack Plummer, if you were to rank all of the starting QBs in the ACC going into this year, you got Jordan Travis. You also have Burkert, who comes from Virginia at NC State. I probably will rank Jack Plummer in the top 5. Okay? You got him, Tyler Van Dyke. So Jack Plummer should come in and be a really good starter right away for Jeff Brohm. So you're going to have your quarterback position taken care of. I think you have more than enough talent at wide receiver. And then when you look at what they bring in on our offensive line, you got left tackle Eric Miller. Now, Eric Miller has started at left tackle previously at Purdue under Jeff Brohm. So this is somebody who, like Jack Plummer, is going to come in, already be familiar with the system, and he should be a plug and start guy right away for Jeff Brohm week 1. Now, I think when you look at what Louisville has offensively, they should be really good this season. I don't really think they're going to struggle on the offense side of the ball at all. I feel like under Marcus Satterfield, however you pronounce his name, I don't really feel like this offense was all that great under him. I feel like a lot of this offense was based on Malik Cunningham just go back there and run around and make plays. I think with Jeff Brohm, you're going to have a more efficient offense, and you're going to have an offense that's going to be way more consistent than the offense that you've had under Marcus Satterfield for the last couple of seasons. Now, this defense is probably the biggest concern for people who don't really keep up with Louisville. Well, JT, like, how good is this defense going to be? Like, we know this offense should be fine, but Louisville, who do they have coming back on defense? Well, they do return pretty much all of their starters from the secondary last year. Plus, they add a lot of depth in the secondary from the transfer portal. You got guys such as Storm Duck from the portal who's going to add to the depth and talent that you have at secondary. So I think that Louisville should be pretty fine on the back end of their defense. But when you look at what they have on their front seven, that's kind of where my concern lies. Now, their defensive line, they do return a good amount of depth there. They also did pick up a couple of transfers that I like. Jeff Clark from Georgia State. You also have Stephon Heron, who had 5.5 sacks at Stanford. And the defensive line, it's not that I don't think they have talent there. They do have talent. They do have guys who can get after the quarterback. But my problem with their defensive line is that I don't know if they have a lot of depth there. If they have one or two guys who ends up going down and having to miss some time with injuries, I think they're going to be in trouble. And at linebacker, I think you have talent there, but you have unproven guys there who are going to have to prove themselves. So this offense should be fine. Their secondary, I think, is going to be the strength of their defense. Their defensive line has talent, not saying that it doesn't, but I don't think they have a lot of depth. So how good and how many games will Louisville win in Jeff Brohm's first season? Well, I think that this is a team that, best case scenario, if everything goes right and they don't have a lot of injuries, they could win 10 games. Their schedule is not that tough. They got to play Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana, and Boston College before they get into the meat and potatoes of their schedule. So they should be 4-0 going on the road into that game against NC State. And NC State is a game that you have a good chance at winning, so you could be 5-0 before you have to play Notre Dame. And the good thing about playing Notre Dame and some of the better opponents that they face this year is that they have to do it at home. So you're playing Notre Dame at home, you play Duke at home, and you play Kentucky at home this year. So 3 of your biggest games of the season are all at home. You don't have to play Clemson. You don't have to play FSU. And I think that your most difficult road game this year is probably going to be against Miami. Now, Miami, I am a Miami Hurricane fan. I know I'm bold as hell for bringing that up this year because the Miami Hurricanes have not been that good the last previous years. But you look at Louisville, they're a team on the rise with Jeff Brohm, but so is Miami with Mario Cristobal. I'm pretty sure Mario Cristobal is not satisfied with how his first season at UM went, and I definitely do expect my Canes to be able to turn things around. And I'm not saying that Miami's going to win that game, but it definitely is going to be a really tough game. Miami does have a really talented team going into this season. Louisville, they do have some question marks with how this offensive line is going to look, how much depth they have up front. So that could be a game that could go either way. So my worst case scenario for Louisville, if everything goes left and they just struggle year one under Jeff Brohm, I think they end up winning only 6 games. Now, my overall record prediction for Louisville this season, I'm probably going to have to go with 9 wins. I think this team is capable of being able to win 9 games. I was close to having them winning 10, but I think 10 would be a little bit too much, even though I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up happening. But I think that Louisville, with the fact that they don't have a tough schedule and the fact that they did do a really good job at addressing the areas of concern that they had via the transfer portal, like I said, you never know how your offensive line and defensive lines are going to play out when you end up bringing in a lot of guys via the transfer portal. Like, you just can't plug and play guys on the offensive line, even if they are highly touted coming out of the portal. Like, having a good offensive line also comes down to more than just talent, but you got to have good communication. You got to have good chemistry. So you wonder if everything's going to come together on that offensive line fast enough for it to end up being good enough for them to be the team like Notre Dame, or being able to be the team like Duke or Miami that's really good up front. Maybe Duke may not be all that great up front as a school like Notre Dame and Miami, but if you're going to pull off some of these upsets, you need to be able to hold your own up front. Now, if you're a Notre Dame fan or a Duke fan or a Kentucky fan, you should be really concerned if Louisville is an underdog going into the week that they play you, because there's a reason why they nicknamed Jeff Brohm the upset master during his time at Purdue. This dude was 7-11 against top 25 opponents, and he was 3-1 against top 5 teams. And we remember what that Purdue team did to that Dwayne Haskins-led Ohio State team. So if you're any team in the ACC and you got to see Louisville and you're a favorite going into the week that you play Louisville, you better watch out, because the upset master just may get you again. But in all seriousness, I think that Jeff Brohm is going to have a really good season at Louisville. I think this is an 8-9 win team. They don't have a tough schedule. Now, if they were playing some of the better teams in the ACC, like a FSU and Clemson, I don't think they will be able to beat those teams. There's some people that think that Louisville could compete for the ACC championship this year. Not a lot of people, but a small group of people who believe that. I don't know. I think that's a little bit bold. Like, could they make it to the ACC championship? Potentially. I think there's a strong possibility that they could, depending on what happens with Clemson and FSU. But for the most part, I think this is going to be a 9-win team. I think they could end up being ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season, somewhere along the 20s or 25 range. But let me know what your first year expectations are for Jeff Brohm at Louisville down in the comment section down below. And this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, make sure that you leave us with a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. We are trying to get to 100 5-star reviews before the start of the college football and NFL season. Leave a like on this video. We go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you guys